Salutations, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland. I was asked by somebody who commented on my Polish Holocaust complicity law video, what about Tuam? And it seemed to me this question was retaliatory, but I'm quite happy to talk about it. I've not insulted any country, Germany, Poland, Israel, anyone might be concerned with that contentious issue. But as someone challenged me, I'm quite happy to talk about something that's dreadful that occurred in Ireland. When I say happy, I obviously recognise that this was a terrible chapter in our history. I'm not pointing the finger at anyone, and I have no difficulty acknowledging that people from the same country as me have done dreadful things, and my compatriots have suffered at the hands of other Irish people, as well as people from abroad. So, what is this whole Tuam situation? Well, there was a town in the west of Ireland called Tuam, still is a town with that name, Tuam, despite the spelling it's pronounced Tuam. And from 1925 to 1961 there was a Magdalen home there, Magdalen home I should pronounce it. Magdalen homes were for unwed mothers. And in that era, there was a terrible stigma around unwed pregnancy. And so a woman who fell pregnant out of wedlock would really want her boyfriend to marry her. And if he did not, then she'd be disgraced and her family might pressurize her to going to one of these Magdalen homes run by the Catholic Church. And nuns would be there. These women would give birth to their babies, have to breastfeed them, and after a few months, the babies would be taken away and usually adopted, often by Catholic families abroad, particularly in the United States. The women would have to work in the Magdalen home, often laundries, be chanting prayers all day, possibly to numb their minds. They were made to feel terribly ashamed as if they'd done something disgustingly immoral, or after they'd left, they'd often have to send £1 a week for the upkeep of their child. The average female wage at the time was £3 a week. So it was a considerable sum, but payable. So that was that. If women ran away, the guards would find them, the guards police in the Republic of Ireland, and bring them back by force. They had to stay there if they'd gone in. Anyway, after a year or two, these women could leave. Some of them chose to stay there for a long time. There've been lots of stories about these Magdalen homes. The system reformed somewhat in the 60s, went on in some form even to the early 90s. So by the 90s, there were very, very few of them left, and being there was voluntary. It was never the law that these women had to go into Magdalen homes, but if they did choose to go in under huge societal pressure, they couldn't leave that soon. Anyway, what is the basis of the Tuam tragedy? Well, often these women were treated terribly, and the children were treated badly as well. Some of the children were not adopted and be brought up by the nuns. I'm not suggesting all the nuns were bad. But the real scandal is several years ago when up to 800 skeletons were discovered. Is it by a septic tank? Actually, in a septic tank. These were the skeletons of embryos, or in some cases, children. So how do they die? Well, must bear in mind that going way back to the 20s, the infant mortality rate was much higher, and perinatal death was much higher because medicine wasn't so advanced, and that was that. Hygiene wasn't so good. There wasn't so much good heating, things like that. And some of these children died of malnutrition. Now that it really is scandalous because with the money that was paid, the nuns could very easily afford to nourish these children adequately. So why weren't they? What was the money going on? That's the mystery. The nuns weren't living it up. So these children died from neglect. Was it willful neglect in some cases? Perhaps criminal neglect? This was an era before antibiotics, so I accept that the rate of childhood death was much higher in the 20s than it is now. But even so, this was much higher than one would expect, bearing in mind the circumstances. Now, these children didn't have their mothers and fathers with them, so the nuns were unlikely to care for a child who wasn't their child quite so much. Some of these nuns had become nuns precisely to avoid having children. They might have grown up in a poor family with a dozen children and not wanted to be a mother because they saw what a terrible strain that was. I don't want to condemn all the nuns. Some of them will have been courageous and very giving people who went into work in Magdalen homes for the right reasons and wanted to care for these women who were in straitened circumstances, wanted to help bring up these children who had been rejected by societal bigotry. Anyway, so that is really the long and the short of the Tuam Magdalen home scandal. Some of these nuns who worked there might still be alive. The place closed in 1961. Perhaps criminal charges could be preferred against some of them. be very difficult to prove who neglected which child, and looking at these skeletons, who they actually were, these children. I suppose with DNA tests, one could test all sorts of living relatives and then figure it out. So the Irish government commissioned studies to look into this. Now, I don't think a single person was murdered in the Magdalen home. No one was deliberately killed by the nuns or anybody else, although one might argue that not looking after the children properly did amount to that. I have no difficulty acknowledging something woeful occurred in my country, that yes, Irish people can do bad things too, and obviously plenty of Irish people have done splendid things as well. So that's that. If the person who asked me to talk about this Tuam home scandal thinks they've upset me, they should think again. It's a dolorous chapter in our history, but I have no hesitation in discussing dark and melancholy chapters in Ireland's history, and recognising that some people who are Irish done bad things. Just because someone's Irish doesn't make them good or bad. Just because someone's of any nationality doesn't make it good or bad. An action's turpitude or rectitude depends on the action itself, on its own merits, not on the nationality of the person who has done it or who's been on the receiving end of it. So that is the Tuam Magdalen home scandal.